Evening, everybody. Mr. Tolbert here, and I've been getting a lot of questions about instrument selection and asking for a little bit of guidance on the different instruments that we're offering in the programs. And so I just thought I would cut a quick kind of off the cuff video. Apologies if it's a little rough around the edges, but just so that some people have some guidance on the different instruments that we're offering. I'm going to go through them kind of like family by family and just talk about like some of the biggest differences between them. The first and most important thing to note is that there's really no right or wrong answer here. All the instruments are great. They all have pros and cons. It's kind of like being on a team that has different positions, that has a goalkeeper or linebackers and receivers, and every instrument has kind of its own special place in the ensemble. They're all super duper important. You can't have a team without all of them. And so really, if your student, especially on that instrument demonstration day, found something that matches them really well, or that just kind of called to them, that is the best guidance that we can possibly have. The students usually gravitate towards the instruments that naturally worked well for them, and that's the most important criteria we can select on. So past that, if you have a student who's confused or doesn't really know or is flopping between a few, I thought maybe I would try to give you some thoughts about what the different like pros and cons are of each group. So I'll start with strings. Strings, we have violin, which is the highest instrument, the highest sounding instrument, then viola, cello, and bass. Violin, viola, cello, and bass. The string instruments are the oldest of all of these instruments. They've been around the longest. Bach wrote for the strings. Mozart, Beethoven, Brahms, Tchaikovsky, they all wrote tons of notes for strings. They're the core members of the orchestra. They play the most notes, and they play the oldest standing literature that's out there. So, fantastic choice to pick any string instrument. The violin is probably the most competitive of all of the instruments that we're offering. There are just a million violinists on earth, and they're all really good. So the viola is probably the least competitive instrument that we offer on the list. There just aren't very many viola players, and so it's easy to excel at that particular instrument. The cello, it runs in between those two, and the bass is quite rare, like the viola as well. The bass is going to cross over a little bit more, actually, than the other ones into jazz and rock and roll. The stand-up bass is actually, it's going to prepare you to play bass, the same exact bass that you would play in a rock and roll band. So, all wonderful choices, and that's kind of like the long and short of those basic instruments. I would say strings in general are probably a little rarer than winds. Except probably violin. Okay, so that covers strings. In the woodwind family, we have flute, clarinet, and saxophone. If you know what an oboe is and you want to play it, we're probably good. Okay, if you don't know what it is, don't worry about it. We might think about switching to it later once you have some of the basics of that woodwind family down. The flute is the highest in this group. It's also the most competitive, just like the violin. It also gets the most notes out of the group, just like the violin. It doesn't use a reed. It tends to be the hardest instrument to make a sound on. Just getting sounds on the flute is usually one of the hardest ones at the very beginning. But once you get it, it's no more or less difficult after that particular obstacle to get around, and all the instruments have different obstacles. It's just that the flute has it right at the very beginning. Clarinet it has one of the widest ranges. It can play really low and really high. So it's a very flexible, diverse instrument. The saxophone is the latest of all of the instruments in terms of when it was invented. So the Bach didn't write any notes for the saxophone. Neither did Mozart, neither did Beethoven, neither did Tchaikovsky. The National Symphony Orchestra doesn't have saxophone players on their staff. They sub out saxophones on the rare pieces of music where they need them that were written in the modern era. But all of that oldest music just doesn't have saxophones on it at all. So the repertoire just isn't as deep, although the saxophone is also kind of like the main instrument in a jazz band. So in a lot of, we might even try to establish a jazz band eventually at some of our schools, but especially in high school, you're likely to see a jazz band, and Dave Matthews Band uses a lot of saxophones. It crosses over into pop music a little easier. So that covers the woodwinds that we offer. The brass family, trumpet is the highest, French horn, trombone, tuba, same story in that The trumpet has the most notes and is the most popular and is the most competitive in the group. The French horn is particularly difficult at the beginning. If you have an extra young student, I might say start with trumpet, and in a couple years we can talk about switching to the horn when you have the brass chops worked up, and some of the fundamentals of just being a brass player can make it a lot easier. You don't have to wait. If you've got like a musical family or a real like really motivated student, great, go for it. But it does tend to be one of the hardest ones to get a start on. A lot of reasons for that. Basically, like when you're playing a brass instrument, it's hard to know what note you're playing. There's only those 3 keys, or you got the slide, and so there's a lot of guesswork. And the French horn is just like a million times harder. There's like a lot more guesswork going on. Trombone is large. It's long. If you don't have long arms, you can't pick the trombone. It's actually too large for a lot of our youngest kids. So if you're like a really big third grader, maybe, but probably not. Probably not at least until like 5th grade should you really be selecting that. If you love the low instruments and you love brass, you can just pick baritone. Baritone is kind of like that mini tuba that it's exactly the same size as the trombone. It's just wrapped up a little bit tighter, and it has valves like the trumpet instead of a slide like the trombone. Fabulous instrument, played at the professional level. You can switch over to trombone later if you want to. You don't have to. It's a great. So the brass instruments are physically the most demanding. Your face is going to hurt when you play. It will literally hurt some. You have to build really strong face muscles to play them. They don't get to play as many notes because you get fatigued faster. You just run out of gas a lot sooner than the other instruments. And so the composers have to write carefully so they don't wear out their brass players. But you also get to play the biggest, loudest, most triumphant parts. So this is sort of what I was talking about in terms of being in a niche place on the team where you wait longer and you play less total notes, but you play really important ones when they come in. And that leaves us with percussion. Percussion, remember when you're signing up for percussion, you're not signing up for drum set. You're signing up for the bell tree, which is like a little miniature xylophone, and you're going to start there and probably play it for a few months before you ever touch a snare drum. The snare drum is like the core drum, and you're going to learn all your sticking technique on that. That can transfer over into marching drums and drum set and all that type of stuff. That can come, but it's a little further down the line. It's very important to us that you really learn how to read notes properly and like do pitch properly and all the like actual ins and outs of being a musician. And not that being a drum set musician is not being that, but it's just so niche and so specialized that we want you to learn the other skills too, so that you're really well rounded. So that's kind of an overview of what all the instruments are. There's no right and wrong choices. If you have especially small students, you might want to think about smaller instruments. The string instruments come in different sizes. So you could get a small-sized violin, a small-sized cello. You can get it sized for your student. So that's a really smart way to go if you have younger students. They're also a little easier to get sound on at the very beginning. Another benefit for very, very young students. The winds, there's more options, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's not necessarily a pro or a con. It's just we tend to have more wind players just because there's so many of them. So if there's follow-up questions, if there's more information that you'd like to know about any of these, then let me know. I might try to do a more in-depth, longer version for each of them, where I actually rate like different things like the quality of the solo repertoire on the instrument. I'm a trumpet player and I always get bummed out. We only have like 3 concertos. A famous composer named Haydn wrote us a beautiful concerto, but we don't have a Mozart concerto. We don't have a Tchaikovsky concerto. If you want to play really big concertos, when you have played for years and years and years and years, you want to play the best stuff ever written, the violin has like the most amazing concertos. The string instruments in general are going to have the most of those. But at any rate, those are more like adult concerns. They shouldn't concern the kids too much. And we can get out a little more info about that if people are interested in it. So just let me know. You're always welcome to reach out by email or phone. I hope this helps, and we're really looking forward to seeing everybody in the programs this year. All right. Thanks so much. Take care.